Vidya ji, thank you for taking the time to speak to me today. I first want you to just introduce yourself for the people who are going to be watching this video, if that's okay.
So, namaste, my name is Acharya Vidya Bhaskerji, and I grew up in Switzerland and India and was fortunate enough to study Sanskrit in a traditional monastery from the age of 12, including all the foundations of Sanskrit grammar, as well as the scriptural foundations, where I was able to acquaint myself with the Hindu scriptures and the commentaries and sub-commentaries in depth.
Okay. So would you, I mean, I've of course worked with you before when we both sat on the Vichar Manthan platform. And I recall you also being introduced as a scholar of the Vedas, where you actually teach others who want to learn about the Vedas. Is that correct?
That's correct. Of course, the Vedas are a very vast subject. So, more specifically, it's the Upanishads of the Vedas. So, it's a specific segment of scriptures belonging to the Vedic canon, so to speak, that I teach specifically. The Veda Samhitas, which is what people generally know as the Vedas, themselves are usually not taught in depth anymore, although we study them, of course.
Very, very interesting. I'm extremely honoured to be in your presence today. So thank you once again for your time. I'm going to go straight into the reason why I had basically arranged to speak with you, and that is really, perhaps you know already that the work I do here in the UK is to promote veganism, and particularly to raise awareness about the realities of the meat and dairy industries. One of my main campaigns at the moment, called Honor the Cow, Give Up Milk, is predominantly aimed at raising awareness amongst the Hindu community in and around the UK. However, I think segments of that campaign are being infiltrated to other parts of the world as well through some of the literature that I have produced. But one of the things that I often get asked by people is, one of the things that people often respond with is, well, our scriptures talk about milk being extremely sacred and the cow being sacred, and therefore it is through our drinking of her milk that we are showing respect to the cow. So despite often being presented with some of these realities of the dairy industry, they will use the scriptures. And what are your thoughts on that? What do our scriptures actually say about the cow, animals, milk, meat even?
So, well, first I'd like to just give a quote. Yo bandhana vadhakleshan praninam nachikirshati sasarvasya hitaprepsu sukhamatyantamashnute. And in paraphrased translation, this means that he who does not seek to inflict any suffering of capture or death upon a living being, such a one is the well-wisher of all and attains perfect happiness. So we're talking about any kind of suffering, whether it is capture or...
Okay.
So this is the parameter that we are following. Then there is no way that a modern Hindu can see the suffering of cows and of calves and any other animals. But let's focus on cows and calves, and then simultaneously be a consumer of the dairy product. That makes no sense, because then we're contributing to the suffering.
Apologies, but I'm playing devil's advocate because I want to further this campaign in as with as much information as possible. But people may then say, well, we have been drinking milk for hundreds of years, and some who perhaps come from India, from Africa, they may have memories of having a cow in their local village. What is the relation then with regards to the quote that you have given about the capture of a being, if this was something that was done many hundreds of years ago and has continued to happen?
So we have to be intelligent when we look at history and the present times. We have to see things in context. So in ancient times, and ancient could be 300 years ago or 400 years ago, you would have a temple, and the temple would have a goshala where the cow would be honored and revered with the greatest love, and the cow would live like a queen. And the would never be mistreated. It would be in the most wonderful environment. Simultaneously, you would have in the village context, animals would be treated well, at least ideally, right? So we have to always differentiate between what is the ideal behind it and what is the practice. But at least even today, I mean, when I was in Rishikesh, at our ashram we had a goshala, and the cows were very, very well treated. So the cow was not captured and kept in a small space, never seeing daylight, or whatever horrors go on in the Western world. It was not part of a multi-billion-dollar industry. So we have to see things in context, and we have to ask ourselves the question: would the people who gave us these instructions, the sages of the rishis, the sages, the munis, would they, seeing today's situation, would they approve of what's going on? And the answer is clearly no.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of just for people who are watching this video, when you talk about the modern realities of the dairy industry in the Western world, things like artificial insemination to continuously impregnate the cow, the systematic separation of cow and calf purely for the purpose of the cow's milk being able to sell it to a supermarket for humans to consume. I mean, milk is such a prominent feature in the Hindu diet, from things like consuming it in foods to the ghee that we use for our religious and spiritual practices. It's so well ingrained. And, you know, of course, there is this attachment, this unfortunate attachment to what they believe is what the religion advocates for the use of milk. Is there anything in that? Often the Bhagavad Gita has been mentioned to me in sort of defense of the consumption of dairy. Is there anything that you can add with regards to what our sacred Bhagavad Gita says in relation to milk and cows?
Again, a question of the parameter. So you're a legal person, right? You're a lawyer. So what is the parameter that is set by the Gita? And the parameter is sarva bhuta hite rataha. That people who are on the path of wisdom, so Bhagavan Shri Krishna describes them as sarva bhuta hite rataha, which means literally immersed rataha, sarva bhuta hite, in the well-being of all beings. So not manushya hite rataha. It doesn't say in the well-being of human beings, or the well-being of your family, or the well-being of your clan, or of your society. It says sarva bhuta hite rataha. So if we take that as the parameter, then the Gita statement that ghritam, ghee, is sattvika, is light and is healthy, that statement has to again be seen in a relative context. Because if the consumption of ghee or dairy product leads to the suffering of a being, then obviously which clause, if we were talking about a contract, which clause would apply, right? So we have to ask the question, which one applies? And it's obviously the one where he states immersed in the well-being of all beings.
All beings.
Right. So that one applies. So we have to think a bit intelligently and not just work on the basis of customs and on the basis of traditions and tastes and likes, because the same argument about hundreds of years of drinking milk also goes for meat. You can say a person that says, well, my family has been eating meat for hundreds of years, therefore I cannot stop eating meat. Well, that's just an idea in the person's head, and that's not something to do with reality.
In terms of us being ingrained in our daily cultures and practices and traditions, oftentimes that's used as I will call it as an excuse to make change, when, in today's modern day era, with Hindus particularly, who very much follow, whether they call themselves religious or not, whether they practice spirituality or not, whether they are agnostic, atheist, born into a Hindu family, it doesn't matter. But ultimately, by human nature, we tend to follow the principles of Ahimsa, not to harm another being. And Hinduism is predominantly based on that foundation of Ahimsa, correct?
Absolutely. Well, a beautiful sutra in the Yoga Sutra states, Ahimsa pratishtayam tat sannidho vairatyagaha, that when Ahimsa is fully established, completely established, and that the commentaries give the exact context and say it has to be totally universal in every context, not just in a spiritual or ritual context. In every context, when ahimsa is established, then there is no enmity in the presence of such a person. Then, so even people who are aggressive by nature, in the presence of a person like that, lose their enmity and they become peaceful and calm. So this is the highest ideal that we follow if we want to practice yoga, if we want to practice dharma, if we want to be practitioners of Hindu dharma, not just in theory, but in practice.
That's extremely important that you've said that, because it's not just reading the scriptures and theorizing what Hindu dharma promotes or talks about, but it is actually practicing it in your daily life. I mean, in essence, what would you tell somebody who is watching this video who perhaps is not all that religious, perhaps born into a Hindu family, perhaps not, but, you know, they consume dairy, have consumed dairy all their lives. You know, what might you say to that person who perhaps just, you know, is not that bothered about the scriptures that we've been talking about?
Well, I would appeal to your compassion. Just look into your own mind, look into your own heart, and sense, is there any rationale? Is there any good reason not to be compassionate? Seeing how your mother has been compassionate to you, how your parents have been compassionate to you, how your best friends have been compassionate to you. Don't think of those who haven't been compassionate, because that's not the point. The point is to think of those who have been compassionate. And then think, is there any reason for you not to be compassionate to other beings? And then think of a cow whose existence in the Western world, and also in India, we have to be very honest about it, is reduced to being an instrument of your pleasure.
Right.
Think of that. Consider, is that compassionate? Are you honoring the being? Are you honoring the dignity of that creature? Are you honoring the wisdom of the sages who state that consciousness is everywhere? It's not just in you, it's in every being. Are you honoring that? And if you can then rationally justify it, fine, then that is your path. You see, if you can justify it, fine. But if you cannot justify it, then you should live according to your heart's insight, prajna, according to your wisdom, which flowers forth from such a look into your own mind.
That's beautifully said, Acharya Ji. Thank you for that. In fact, I mentioned that the person who's perhaps watching this who doesn't follow any dharma, Hinduism or any other religion, but what about the person that is watching this who is extremely religious, follows Hinduism? In fact, the priest, let's go to the epitome of that, taking it to the temple, taking it to the mandir. And the priest who every Monday allows people to come in and pour milk offering on the shivling, who offers prasad in terms of dairy, prasad, does ghee divas in front of the idols, the god statues. What might you be able to say to them with what you know in relation to what Hinduism talks about, the scriptures talk about, and what the modern day reality of the dairy industry is?
Well, addressing the priest, I would point out, first of all, scripturally, I would point out that the use of pure water is higher than the use of any other ingredient. Whether it is for abhisheka or it is for offering to the deities, the use of pure water is higher. And I can give you the scriptural references for that. Secondly, we have to also adjust dharma to the times. So there is a statement, yadyapi shuddham loka viruddham nacharaniyam, which means that even if something is pure in your view, even if something is right in your view, if it is against the loka, and of course we can say if it's against the world in the sense of if it's against common sense, if it's against wisdom of the world, of the times, then you shouldn't do it. This is a scriptural statement. Use your common sense. Don't stick to a tradition just because it's your tradition. If it's not based on daya, if it's not based on compassion, it makes no sense at all anymore. So we have to think rationally. We should not think, and we have to think from the heart. We should not just think stubbornly, because that is a form of sangha. Sangha means attachment. And the scriptures tell us that nissangatve nischalatatvam, the absolute reality, the immovable reality, is in detachment. It's not in attachment. And if you are attached to a custom, if you're attached to a practice, to a ritual practice, you are not on the path to realizing ultimate reality. You're simply on the path of solidifying your attachment.
In terms of your dharma, in terms of attachment, in terms of really cherry picking what it is that you want to follow and what you don't want to follow. If you're going to really open up the scriptures and use the scriptures as a defense to consume milk, let's really open it up. And you've literally just given us a number of examples of where the scriptures highlight and very clearly say that, you know, we should move with the times. And if ultimately we are doing an act or an omission which intrinsically is not in alignment with the logic and the compassion that we all as humans are born with, it's innate, then we shouldn't be doing it. Acharyaji, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it, and I hope to be able to really use this video to open up more eyes and hearts of people out there, so that the suffering of these beautiful beings, the animals, the cows, can be lessened and ultimately fully eradicated. And I'd really like to thank you for playing your part in that. Thank you so much. Namaste.